Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, as always, Pat McFarland, and on the line, I have Laurie Calhoun. Laurie, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've been meaning to ask you on the show for weeks now, maybe months.
Well, happy to be here.
Yeah, well, so you're you have a resume, or I guess credentials, like longer than my arm. So this is your first time on the show. You want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Laurie Calhoun. I'm the author of several books. Most importantly to you, I believe, are the two war books, War and Delusion, A Critical Examination, and We Kill Because We Can, From Soldiering to Assassination in the Drone Age. And I have written dozens of other essays and chapters in books, and also some metaphilosophy, which it might be of interest to you since you're a lawyer. So just a general critic and philosopher at large is how I would describe myself.
And you're a frequent contributor at the Libertarian Institute too, and that's how I became aware of your work.
Yes, Scott Horton invited me to contribute essays there. He had been inviting or asking for my essays from my blog, which is the droneage.wordpress.com. Right when my drone book was issued, I was very active at my blog, and so several of my pieces are up at antiwar.com from about that time, which is 2015 was the hardcover release, and 2016 was the paperback release. And then I was working on a couple of novels for a while, so I sort of went silent. And he contacted me and said, "Do you still write things?" And so I was happy to contribute essays to the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah, when I thought I saw, did you write for the Independent Institute? Because I saw some profile on there.
Yes, actually, a few of my first war essays were published by the Independent Institute in their journal, and I became comrades, so to speak, with Robert Higgs over there and David Thoreau. So yeah, good group of people.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And well, can I guess to start off, can I just ask you, like, how did you become interested in the topic of war and peace?
Yeah, interesting question. I have a degree in chemistry, so I was in science for a while. I did research in organic chemistry and a variety of things related with science, and then I really recognized that I was interested in the topic of war in 1991. I was a grad student in philosophy at Princeton, and that's when the Gulf War was waged, launched, rationalized by George H.W. Bush. Sometimes I forget to say the H. So I was at Princeton at that time, and the first things I wrote about war were letters to the editor. I wrote to newspapers before that war. And I also wrote an op-ed in the school paper, I think it's called the NASA Weekly at Princeton. And I was just appalled because I watched all of the congressional debate about that war. And I was like, there's actually no reason for us to go to war at this point. It was, from my perspective, completely uncalled for. Given the nature of the conflict between Saddam Hussein and Kuwait, he claimed that they were siphoning off oil from his land, but George H.W. Bush had already decided that he wanted to have a war, and so they were drumming up support. You were probably a real youngster at that time, but there was just massive support for this because George H.W. Bush used this just war theory and claimed that we were these great warriors, and he really got the whole country behind the war with the yellow ribbons and everything. And I was one of the dissenters. So I took a bus from Princeton to Washington, D.C. In 1991 to protest that war. I'm probably the only person who also took a bus in 2003 to Washington, D.C. to protest the second Bush's war. And in 2003, I also protested with the Américains contre la guerre in Paris because I happened to have scheduled a vacation which was in Paris right when the bombing started. So I have done a little bit of activism because I've traveled to DC twice to protest both Iraq wars. And so I was really appalled in 1981. And the worst part of all was when Princeton granted George H.W. Bush an honorary doctorate that war. That just made me so sick. I had to actually leave town. It was like, it happened in May. It was like at the commencement. I was like, I cannot be in this village when this happens. So I left. And so after that, I was, really appalled by it. I thought it was awful how Bush Sr. would say things like, oh, we kicked the Vietnam syndrome. Well, Vietnam syndrome was a good thing. You should be hesitant to go to war. You shouldn't want to go to war and sacrifice people needlessly and kill millions of people and destroy the quality of life of millions more and cause massive exodus. You shouldn't want to do these things. So I just always disliked George H.W. Bush. I think he was a liar, and he tricked people into supporting this war by all these little stories. For example, that Saddam Hussein's henchmen ripped Kuwaiti babies from incubators, so all sorts of stuff. So he did get the UN Security Council approval for that war, but only through deception. So a lot of people, they contrast the first Iraq war with the second Iraq war and say, well, at least the first one was legal. Well, it was legal, but it was actually, he garnered the support through very deceptive and therefore coercive means. So then after that, I just continued on with my philosophizing for a while. The next big moment for me was when Bill Clinton started bombing Kosovo. Okay, so the day he started bombing Kosovo is when I started writing essays in earnest. That was it for me. So from then on, I just wrote on war up until now. And again, it was a case where I was very opposed to the idea of this bombing people as a means of so-called humanitarian intervention, right? So I wrote essays about that. And I just puzzled over the dominance of this just war paradigm and how people just parroted these little sound bites that sound so pleasing. But I really wanted to know, being a philosopher and being quite skeptical, I wanted to know, what are the arguments? So what exactly is the foundation for this whole thing? So at that point, I was working at Harvard, and I went to the library, and I basically checked out all the books on just war theory and read all of them. So after doing this massive, for myself, because I just wanted to know, I just didn't understand, why people thought that, Michael Walzer's just war theory was great, and it was like the Bible of foreign policy and everything. So I read all the books, and what I concluded was that there's nothing there. It's essentially the Potemkin village of theories, or if you like, the Emperor's New Clothes, because it's built on a foundation of air. There's really no foundation. It's just everyone parrots these pleasing sounding tenets of just war theory, and they go through the bullet points. Leaders who want to wage war, they go through the bullet points and say, look, we satisfied this, we satisfied this, we satisfied this, let's go. But when I examined the scholars on just war theory, I could not find any actual substance behind the facade. So the facade is very pleasing, which is why it's so effective as a rhetorical device, because it's almost a list of platitudes, like don't kill innocent people, it has to be a last resort, you have to use proportional means. These things all sound very common sense almost. And so the more I dug into this, the more I realized that the main problem at this point with just war theory is that we don't any longer believe what the original just war theorists believed, which was that leaders were appointed by God, and therefore their calls to war were in effect a reflection of God's will. We don't believe that. We have secular views of how our leaders become leaders. We don't believe that Joe Biden was appointed by God. We don't believe that he has direct connection to the Almighty. We don't believe that his judgment is any better than any of our judgments. So then when you look at the theory, one of the criteria, of course, is legitimate authority. And the problem with the theory is that the legitimate authority himself has the prerogative, the interpretive prerogative, for determining what all the other tenets mean. Which means, of course, that if he's already determined to go to war, he's just going to interpret all of the other tenets of just war theory to support his case for war. So that's how it started. It started with me reacting as a person to my leaders bombing other countries. And then with Clinton's bombing of Kosovo, there was no turning back. Then I started writing essays and essays and essays I eventually turned a lot of these published essays into War and Delusion. And so that volume, it's like the culmination of about a 10-year investigation on my part. And then when the drone program came about and started being used, I felt the need to write that book because I just thought the practice was so outrageous, and you, as an attorney, I imagine, do as well, because it violates everything we supposedly believe about due process and human rights. So that's long story short. That's my history of involvement in writing on war.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and I wasn't able to finish War and Delusion because I've just had a crazy week, and I read half of it a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, and just week was so crazy, kids and everything like that. But it seems like another cornerstone of your argument is that war has so we don't believe in divine right anymore, but we've moved to in the sense that modern warfare does not spare civilians anymore. And maybe there was a time past where you would have gentlemen get together and they would go out on the battlefield and it was consigned just to that fight. But now there's just indiscriminate killing of civilians, and that's just the nature of warfare now.
That's right. I think that another factor I think that matters is that leaders no longer fight in their own wars. So there was a time when to be a leader and to wage war or to counter another army, you actually had to have courage, and we don't. That's no longer the case. Our leaders are sequestered behind bastions. They're never at in any danger of losing their lives. Even if there's a nuclear war, they have bunkers and whatever. So it's a very different scene in terms of how war is waged. Another major factor in the history of warfare that changed everything was the development of aerial means of transport. So it used to be that you have a country and you defended your country in the way that you would defend your home, right? The perimeters of your property, that's where people cannot penetrate without risking, you shooting at them because you're afraid that they're going to shoot you. But with the development of airplanes and aerial transport, the whole concept of defense was redefined so that now supposedly defense includes flying thousands of miles away and dropping bombs on other people's property. So it's a completely different scene. And the first chapter of the book is where I go through very painstakingly and explain why modern war is not an instance of self-defense. It's completely disanalogous. They have no connection to one another. And so if war is not a means of literal self-defense, then you have to find some other way of justifying it, assuming you believe that killing is wrong. So the first premise, underneath all of this is that you believe that it's wrong for you to go kill someone right now. Okay, so then the mystery is, how does it become right for you, Patrick, to go kill someone right now just because you put on a uniform? What makes the distinction? You can't kill someone and then you can kill someone. So there has to be some theoretical apparatus that explains why you in your current mode of dress are not permitted to kill someone, but if you put on a uniform, suddenly you are allowed to go kill people. So I just basically try to explore in that book all of the possible ways that you can rationalize war, and I reject all of them.
Yeah, and I find it to be very convincing. And I did a little piece for my Substack where I tried to, because I found that your argument against war as being self-defense was very analogous, and it was very close to what Murray Rothbard kind of argues in terms of why the state is illegitimate. And I guess I don't know enough about your background to know if you're a Rothbardian libertarian or not.
I am, as I told Scott Horton, I'm a GDI. I'm a goddamn independent. I don't really call myself anything but Laurie Calhoun. So yeah. I don't even necessarily identify as a libertarian. It's just that I agree with libertarians on war from start to finish.
Yeah.
I think I might disagree. Like when I was working with people at the Independent Institute, I would point out things like, I actually think it's worse to bomb people than to tax people. Okay, so there was a slight distinction. Like some people there, I felt like they thought they were more both morally atrocious. I'm like, I think actually bombing people is a little bit worse than taxing them. I'm against both, of course. But, so
Well, I would agree with you about bombing is worse than taxing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really. I mean, it's true. I've been writing a lot of essays for the Libertarian Institute and I think I'm discovering that I really probably am a libertarian because of my reaction to the COVID pandemic and all the things that went on throughout those 2 years. And it seems like I have kind of the intuitive libertarian reactions to everything. So maybe I really am a libertarian, but I just don't like labels.
Yeah, yeah. No, my wife is similar in that sense. You know, she's her own person in that and doesn't, kind of avoids the labels, which I respect.
It's actually, unfortunately, right now, I think that this is not why I don't call myself a libertarian. Like, I don't say, libertarian on any of my profiles or anything, but it also does, unfortunately, drive people away because people, anyone who's at all on the left or center of the left, they have these prejudices and stereotypes against libertarians. You're like selfish, you don't believe in, they don't understand anything about libertarianism, but they know the word. And so the word is like a bad word, according to a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been moving my content. That's why, I don't know, I was rethinking the name Liberty Weekly because I've been covering, just anti-war stuff, but I'll digress from that. What I was trying to circle the square was because you say that, individuals are inherently different than what a nation state is.
Right.
Comparing the two, it just doesn't work. And so I was trying to make the argument that a nation state can't claim self-defense. A nation state can't be defending an individual because they can't defend that individual without their consent. The argument I was trying to make, because they literally cannot get the consent of every single individual they're claiming to defend. But I couldn't circle that square logically because there was this instance where, like, so if I'm living in a neighborhood and the neighborhood decides to form a neighborhood watch, and I want them not to defend my home, I can withdraw my consent, but I can't stop them. I can't stop them from my home outside of my property necessarily. So
that's an interesting argument. Yeah, mine was a little bit more basic. I sort of look at the most basic elements of the practice and try to understand it logically. So my primary argument in that regard is that if you assume that individuals have individual rights not to be killed, okay, you assume that, it does not follow that the nation state has a collective right, because that's the fallacy of composition. Just as, if you have an assembly of men and all the men, maybe gender's not a good example these days, but all of the members of the assembly are male, it doesn't mean that the assembly is male. So it's a logical fallacy to conclude from the possession of individual rights to the possession of the collective's right to self-defense. But it's similar to what you're saying in some ways. I do touch on your concern when I talk about the fact that soldiers, one of the reasons why killing in war is not self-defense is that soldiers are not acting on the basis of their own perception. So the only reason why they're killing someone is because their commander tells them to. Whereas if you're defending your home, you see the person with the car, and then with the gun, and then you react. Instead, in war, you're dependent upon the interpretation of someone whom you may or may not have grounds for trusting, to be honest.
Well, I guess the other thing I was asking you about that we kind of touched on already is how leaders use just war theory basically to, writ large, to justify what they're doing. And thing that you said that I really agreed with is that, well, if you ask from the subjective point of view of each leader on both sides of the conflict, they both believe that their cause is just.
Yes, this is a super important point and a really interesting way of approaching the topic is that you think about what everyone on your side believes, and then you realize that you actually have the mirror image of that exact structure on the other side. So the soldiers they're all told a story by their commanders, just like our soldiers are told a story by the commanders, and they tend to believe the stories told to them by the commanders, but they can't both be right because they're mutually incompatible. And the soldier, in the moment of killing, he has no idea whether his side is going to prevail. If his side prevails, then he'll be called a just warrior and a hero. If his side does not prevail, he'll be called a criminal and a murderer. But in the moment of killing, all he's doing is killing someone. So the only thing that happens in war is killing and destruction. That's what happens. And then everything gets sorted out afterwards, and then people apply the labels, of justice or injustice, criminal, war criminal, or hero after the fact. So from the perspective of the soldier himself, it's really a kind of Pascalian wager. Should I kill someone, on order, on faith, that my commander is right, when in fact I know that the analogous guy on the other side, who looks just like me, he's being told the same story by his commander, and one of us is wrong. So even if you believe in personal self-defense, you have rational grounds for declining to kill anyone on the order of anyone, because you know that at most 50% of the commanders are right. I think all of them can be wrong. If war is absolutely immoral and should never be fought anywhere, then you should never be killing anyone, period. But even if there were a just war, you would only have a 50% chance of being on the right side anyway. So you're going to become either a hero or a murderer, depending. But all you're doing in either case is killing.
Yeah. And have you read Killing in War by Jeff Mcmahon?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, I have it on my phone. It kind of looks like this.
Okay, no, I have not read it.
Okay, well,
but I've read some articles by him. He's written a lot of good anti-war stuff. Yeah.
And I found this book to be really good. It was really dense, but in terms of he was able to make an argument that being a soldier abroad in an aggressive war is morally it's bad. I mean, to put it in pretty basic terms. But he was able to do it without condemning soldiers per se, because there's some mitigating factors. But essentially, he made the case that if you are someone who is fighting an aggressive war, i.e., on foreign soil, then you are an aggressor, and that what you're is condemnable.
That's right. So if you look at our most recent war in Iraq, in reality, the people who fought back were defending themselves against the unjust invaders. Of course, that's not how the story is told from the perspective of U.S. propagandists at all. But that's from their perspective. We're being invaded. Just like if your home is invaded, you're going to defend your home. They felt the need to defend themselves. And unfortunately, what happened instead is they were all just painted as factional terrorists, when in fact, some of them were simply defending their homeland against the invasion. So, big difference between defending your own territory and flying far away and killing people.
Yeah, because I think the counter to that, or the argument that is a counter to, rather, is that because I think you mentioned this in your book, is that when, I don't know who it was that said, but when you're a soldier in war, you're not fighting for the cause, you're fighting for the guy next to you. And there's been a lot of people that have said that. And it's kind of this argument that, well, even if you are abroad, when someone is shooting at you, you are justified in killing them to defend your own person and survive. And but then you need to look out at the bigger picture.
Yeah, Elaine Scarry has a really good quote on that. She denies that whole picture. She says, if soldiers were fighting to defend their comrades, their fellow soldiers, what they would do is drive them to a new geographical location, is move them to a new geographical location, because that's how you would save their lives. You save their lives by getting them out of the war zone. Instead, this slogan is that, oh, you're defending your brother on the line with you. And, once they're there is, of course, the possibility of individual self-defense against people trying to kill them, in the way that if an individual approaches you and tries to kill you, you have, presumably have the right to defend yourself. So, but the question is, why are they there? Okay, so they shouldn't be there. They're in the wrong place. So could argue as an attorney, felony murder rule applies. So if you commit a crime, then it doesn't matter if you so you are in the middle of committing a robbery, and the clerk kills the policeman who comes to the rescue. You, as the robber, are held responsible, because if you had not been committing the crime, then the killing would never have occurred. So the point is, if you invaded the country illegally, you shouldn't be there. So any act of killing that happens there, you are actually responsible for. So that's the way I view the entire Iraq war.
So my other question then had to do with this, admittedly arguing the philosophy behind war and arguing the legal justifications for all of these things can seem pretty esoteric to people who, are just doing their jobs and they're raising their kids and stuff like that. And a few layers removed, even because, someone like Scott Horton, I haven't heard him argue the philosophy behind it as much as others, because Scott, he's a names and dates guy. He interviews people, he gets the dates right and all the facts and all the lies about war, and he does all that stuff. But someone like your work focuses more on these moral and philosophical foundations behind the arguments that leaders are trying to make. So there's, right now in the libertarian movement, there's a big part of it really pushing for pragmatism and practicality, and not focusing so much on these esoteric arguments from theory. But I assert in my Stack piece basically that, well, this is important because the leaders care about these justifications. So I wanted to ask your take on that.
Well, I have a chapter called Real Leaders, where I investigate, and I understand why you haven't finished the book yet. It's very dense. Every chapter is really, really dense in arguments. And if you're more into reading foreign policy journalism, and then you try to read my book, it's like, whoa, it's really, really dense. Like, there's an argument every paragraph. So in the chapter called Real Leaders, I explain how leaders comport themselves, and I again dig into the most basic dynamic used by all of them. So I ask, do leaders actually believe what they say? Well, you actually don't know. A leader could be a realist about morality, or about war, or he could be an idealist about war. So he could believe in just war, or he may not believe in just war. He may believe that all's fair in love and war, as they say. But what we do know is that all leaders, no matter what their views on war happen to be, they use the same idiom. So they still use the just war paradigm to defend their wars. Whether they believe in just war or not, they both use just war theory to defend their wars. All leaders use rhetoric, so you don't actually know what is in their hearts when they say, this is a just war and we have to go bomb this country. You don't actually know whether they believe in just war or they're just using just war rhetorically. And some of them, I think, are actually fairly confused. So they may not themselves have spent very much time thinking about what any of this implies. So you can look at, take someone like Bill Clinton when he started bombing Kosovo. He was in the midst of a domestic scandal.
Hey guys, welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. As many of you know, I am part of the Libertarian Institute alongside of my colleagues there. Scott Horton is our director. We just added Keith Knight to the masthead. He is the managing editor of the Institute now. We've also added Will Porter and Connor Freeman as part of our team over at the Institute. We're so excited about all the work that we're doing. Kyle and Will are doing daily news stories, like really hard-hitting news. And if you want to know what's going on in Ukraine and in foreign policy-wise, but also domestic stuff, there's really hard-hitting news that they're doing. They put out 40 or 50 news articles this month, and this is the first month that they've been doing it. It might even be 3 weeks that they've been doing it. So they're just on pace, really killing it with really good content. I've stepped up my game. I'm writing a whole lot more. Connor is going to step up his game and be contributing articles a lot more. Keith has a new book coming out. So we have so much going on, and we really depend on your support in order to do all those things and to expand our coverage and reach and content. And so we've been doing it for a few days now. We have about $5,000 of our $60,000 goal raised. So there's a long way to go, and we really need your help in order to get there. So if you just want to support me, however, I've been featuring my Substack lately. What they're not telling you, I've been putting out content every day. I've been putting out content every day for the last week or so, and I hope to continue that trend, but I'm shooting for at least every other day. But I am putting free content out. I'm also putting paid content out, premium content that you won't get anywhere else. And a lot of that has been running my articles early, and giving you early access to those articles and to my episodes. But there are free posts there, and there's complete bonus episodes of the Liberty Weekly podcast that you can find libertyweekly.net/Substack. I would encourage you to join just the free list and see, like, even the paid content has previews that comes out. So you get some content there at the beginning for free, even in the premium posts. So first, though, support the Libertarian Institute in our spring fundraiser. You get bonuses like a drawstring bag, a Libertarian Institute coffee mug, and signed books by Scott Horton. So really do appreciate it, you guys. I'm also looking to add a founders level at the Substack level. So for $100 a year, I think what I'm going to do is add a producer credit to anyone who joins at that level to the end of every single episode. And I'm also working on a real membership site for people who want to support my podcast and get newsletter content like that, because I don't necessarily trust Substack, so I'm looking for some alternatives with the same functionality. But anyways, well, thank you guys for everything. I know this is a little bit of an extended mid-roll, but we really are pressing that spring fundraising drive. So if you want to give to that and then sign up for the free Substack at libertyweekly.net/Substack, libertarianinstitute.org/donate is where you can do those things. So those are my 2 calls to action. Thanks again, you guys. I really do appreciate the fact that you would listen and the fact that you would consider supporting. So thanks. Peace. Okay, so the question, I think the question was, we had a little bit of technical difficulties there, but the question is that, there's a big push for pragmatism and libertarianism right now. Why should we care about these esoteric arguments about theory?
Well, we should care because we should care about the people who are being killed. So ultimately, if you believe that people have a right to life and that they should not be killed as a means of leaders achieving foreign policy objectives, then you should be very concerned about this. So right now, for example, Biden just sent another $1 billion in military aid, which is a euphemism for deadly weapons, to Ukraine, which means they're going to be used to kill people. Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians will be killed by these munitions, as we know from the 20-year war on terror. We know what happened in Syria when massive quantities of weapons were sent. We know what happened in Afghanistan. Taliban now has a lot of our weapons. We know what happened in Iraq. So this is what happens. It's actually common sense. And for some reason, our so-called foreign policy experts don't really have a memory about any of this. They don't really process the actual consequences of any of their interventions because they don't take any responsibility for it. So that's a big part of my argument near the end of the book, is that responsibility has really dropped out of the war picture. So it used to be that you would have credibility by virtue of the fact that you were willing to fight. So if a leader went to war with his troops, this at least gave you some reason for believing in his sincerity. He may have been mistaken, but at least you knew he was sincere. What we have now is basically functionaries who wage war as a kind of global game, and their skin is never on the line, and they think it's perfectly fine to sacrifice these people's lives. I'm sure you remember the famous Madeleine Albright quote, "May she rest in peace," when she was asked if she thought that the deaths of 500,000 children in Iraq were worth it, and she said, "Yes, we think it's worth it." And that's exactly what we're doing with these foreign policy initiatives that completely ignore human rights, despite our rhetoric. We have all this lofty rhetoric about, we're the beacon of democracy and human rights in the world. In fact, we're killing all of these people. And unfortunately, this comes from a long history of politicians waging wars and then forgetting about them. So, because they never had to take responsibility for any of the things that went awry. So you might think, since we just pulled out of Afghanistan and it was a failure as a war, I mean, Taliban, it's actually worse off than it was when we went in, because now it's totally corrupt. The whole place is like riven with corruption. But the Taliban is in power just as they were when we invaded in 2001. So basically, instead of saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we actually just lost all of these wars in the Middle East," instead we just blunder ahead, sending more arms, making the same mistakes over and over again. Yeah, let's call for regime change again, because that worked so well in Libya. So it worked so well in Iraq. It worked so well in Afghanistan. No, it didn't work in any of these cases. But no one is ever called to account. And part of the reason is, unfortunately, this vestige of just war theory, where supposedly all that really matters is your intention. So if you intend to do well, then that's it. That's all that you can do. And it doesn't matter how many corpses you leave in your wake.
Yeah, and it seems to me that one of the particular reasons why I'm so interested in this, and I'm really just kind of beginning my study of this subject area, but it seems like because these leaders and in the think tank, the think tanks, all the neoconservatives and stuff, they seem to be so preoccupied with it because they think it's important to some degree, and so they feel like they have to keep justifying it in some way. And what do you think the reason is that they feel like they have to justify it? I mean, that seems to be evidence to me that, at least in international law or the population is expecting some sort of justification. And I know we can't read minds, but what do you think?
I'm sorry, why do we keep blundering ahead with these same things over and over again?
No, why do the leaders feel the need to justify their actions? Because they must think that it's important to justify their actions, or else.
Well, that's the only way they can garner support. No leader garnered support for his military campaign by saying, "Let's go murder a bunch of Russians." No one can garner the support of his populace by doing that. Instead, they cast what they want to do in moral terms, and they talk about justice, and they invoke just war theory. And they denounce the enemy as evil. They use these Manichaean tropes. There's the new Hitler. Every time they want to go bomb somewhere, they call the leader of that country the new Hitler. So Slobodan Milosevic in 1999, Saddam Hussein in both 1991 and then again in 2003. Bashar al-Assad, they're all Hitler. Okay, so everyone is Hitler. So now Putin is Hitler.
Yeah.
So that's why they can't get the support. So they cast everything in these anodyne and self-congratulatory terms. Okay, so we're courageous, we're good, we are good, and they are evil. I have an essay called "We Are Good and They Are Evil." That's sort of the soundbite. And if you look at the television coverage right now, I can't actually myself stomach it. But if you look at it of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Putin is the big boogeyman. He's evil. He can't be reasoned with. But of course, we know this is false. We know he can be reasoned with. We know that the war has to come to an end at the negotiation table. But for whatever reason, the United States has decided to just continue to prolong this conflict, even while knowing that it's incredibly dangerous. And with our president in a debilitated mental state where he can't even keep his story straight, it's actually even more dangerous. So I don't know if you saw him shaking hands with air the other day. I mean, this guy has someone around him has the codes to the nuclear football. So it's extremely dangerous. And it's dangerous to do things such as claim that Putin cannot be the leader, as Biden recently said. Why? Because Putin knows what was done to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and others. So if that's the fate that awaits him, he has no actual reason not to use nuclear arms and take as many people down with him as he wants. I mean, I don't think he'll do that. I think he is rational and he's not going to do that, but I don't see the point of continuing to provoke him in this way.
Oh. Yeah, well, I guess all we can really do is try to convince people. It feels so helpless because, and that's one of the reasons maybe why people don't do anything is because.
Well, they've been taken in by all of this rhetoric, and it's very seductive, and people want to believe that they're good. So this is the title of my book, War and Delusion. We want to believe all of this lofty rhetoric about how our soldiers are courageous heroes. And we paint the enemy as evil to elevate ourselves by contrast. So that's a big part of it. And when you ask, why do all these think tanks and, take these figures like Max Boot, they're just going to support every war that ever comes down the pipeline. Part of it is just this self-interested desire to confirm that they are actually experts. So they want to have an influence, right? And so I saw, for example, Samantha Power was interviewed by Rachel Maddow the other day. Samantha Power was one of the key persons who talked Obama into destroying the country of Libya. So why should anyone seek her advice about anything? And yet there she is, because Biden uttered the G word again, genocide. So now you call in your local expert, the person who has rallied against genocide her entire adult life, even though she just helped to destroy the country of Libya. So these people, they're never redressed for their failures. So basically, everyone who is in this area of foreign policy, all of the so-called diplomats and statesmen, they never take any responsibility for the failures, and then they add bullet points to their resume. Oh, look, I held these positions, blah, blah, blah. And then they get position after position after position and just continue to blunder ahead. And again, they're riding on this assumption that they always had good intentions. So they had good intentions. They couldn't actually foresee what was really going to happen, even though we knew what happened in Iraq. We knew that it was severely destabilized the moment Saddam Hussein was taken down. So, of course, that would happen in Syria, which Samantha Power also rallied for. She really wanted to take out the leader of that land. And then they took out Muammar Gaddafi. Oh, surprise, look what happened. Major destabilization. Like, you couldn't have seen that coming. But they basically, they have no actual memory, or they suppress their memory of it because I think maybe it's too awful to actually face up to the reality of what they have done. I would say people like Condoleezza Rice is another example. They always interview these people. They asked George W. Bush for his opinion on foreign policy, which is crazy. I mean, look what he did to the world. And yet this is how it works, in part because the media has become a part of the whole military-industrial congressional media, logistics, pharmaceutical, banking. It's all this big tentacular thing now, and the media, unfortunately, is a really big part of it. So it's been like that since 1991. The coverage of the 1991 Gulf War was they acted like it was a sporting event. You didn't see any images of dead people. No one was killed. We just dropped a few bombs on military targets. So and it just goes on and on with the media becoming worse and worse. They're really at this point a ministry of propaganda, I think. Yeah.
It's funny what you mentioned too, because I mean, when Scott debated Bill Kristol, all those things that you mentioned happened. I mean, he couldn't remember certain dates or certain things that he advocated for, positions that he took. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, when he threw up a flag, it seemed like it was like Now, my opponent here is he's operating under the assumption that I'm a bad actor and that I'm acting in bad faith. And I don't think Scott, I mean, Scott piled so many bad takes that Bill had that I think that was what it looked like. But I think it was Bill, his own actions and positions.
Yeah, no, it's the reality of what they've supported. I mean, Max Boot is another good example. You know, he's out there tooting his horn all the time about the next, potential invasion. I mean, and I don't know if they compartmentalize and they assume that I have good intentions, and so like the consequences don't matter. But I do think that this is a vestige of just war theory. It's this whole idea that what really matter are intentions instead of consequences. And I think we need to redirect, when we look at war, our attention to the actual consequences. Okay, so it really does matter how high the pile of corpses is. It doesn't matter that you meant to do well, because this is what you actually did. You destroyed these people's lives. You degraded millions of other lives. You caused people misery. You terrorized them. You traumatized them. You did this. It doesn't matter what you wanted to do. This was the consequence of your military campaign.
Yeah. And that's like when I first started kind of getting into foreign policy, I had a discussion with someone where I was like, okay, well, point to a good U.S. intervention, and they said Korea, and at the time I hadn't really looked at it close enough, because it's like the claim, well, we kept South Korea from becoming communist, right? Well, what about all the oils dropped, and all the deaths and everything like that? And it just
the question is whether these people have the right to use the lives of other people as their coin, and that is what they do. They use them for their purposes. So for right now, prolonging the Ukrainian war is using people on the ground for the foreign policy objectives of elites, just as the civilians of Iraq were used throughout the period from 1991 to 2003 and afterwards by foreign policy elites. These people the victims were regarded as expendable, and so we need to come back to remembering that, focusing upon the actual human reality of these people. So you may think that they're collateral damage, this bland, anodyne euphemism for dead civilians. But when you think about the reality of war from their perspective, even before being killed, they were terrorized. And the people who do survive have dramatically diminished quality of life. A lot of them have lost their loved ones. They're left bereft. And of course, we know this in anti-war circles, that you create more terrorists by creating angry people. So you kill someone's brother and he decides to take up the jihadist cause. So it also has, getting back to practical matters, it has practical implications as well. I mean, the reason why the war on terror went on and on and on is because we kept creating new enemies by killing innocent people, and then people would retaliate in anger. So, we have to remember that these are actual human beings. These are not numbers. The way the military talks about them, it's like, oh yeah, a few collateral damage. Yeah, we had a little collateral damage, but not too much. But each one of those people was like you, a person who had a life and a future and dreams and aspirations, and who was terrorized before being mutilated, maimed, and killed. I mean, it's awful what is done in war, and people forget all about that because it's painted in these broad strokes, these euphemisms, and just the victims are completely forgotten about. I think one of the benefits of this horrible case on August 29th, 2021, is it brings back to the forefront the reality of what we've been doing to these people. So on August 20th, you are nodding your heads, you remember, there was a drone strike in Kabul. It took out an aid worker and 9 other people, seven of whom were children. And it's actually appalling. We destroyed these people's lives. Those children will not grow up to do anything to enjoy a full human life. We destroyed their lives. And the military initially claimed, oh, we just took out a bunch of terrorists, protected people at Kabul airport. But it turned out that because the U.S. military no longer had the prerogative to pronounce the official story of what was going on in Kabul because they're already withdrawing, that people on the ground, locals, filled in the blanks and said, look, here's what really happened. And they eventually had to retract the story. But what's important about this example is that it shows you probably what happened in many other cases where we only got the official story from the military and the people on the ground were never allowed to express dissent with that. And some of the people who tried to dissent from the U.S. military narrative in these obscure remote places where they were using drone strikes were actually put on hit lists and also added to the list of associates to be taken out. So it's really atrocious what's been going on. And I think I wish that there would be more attention to that strike. I'm going to have to write, I think, another essay on it or maybe a whole book, because it has a wealth of information. It offers a wealth of information to us about how exactly the war on terror has been conducted and what the criteria have been used for executing people using these drone strikes. I mean, it was outrageous. In this case, the guy drove a white Toyota Corolla, and they had intel according to which some bad guy was driving a white Toyota Corolla. They had never heard of this guy the day before they killed him. They had never heard of him. He was not on anyone's radar. And they thought that was sufficient. You as a lawyer should be especially appalled because, there's no evidence there. It's not even it doesn't even rise to the level of circumstantial evidence. The guy was driving his car around town and delivering water to people, putting stuff in his trunk, taking it out. And because of their confirmation bias, they're like, oh, bad guy doing bad things. They killed him. This has happened so many other times in remote parts of the region. And one of an argument that I have not seen other people make very often, but I like to make, is that we know that in Guantanamo Bay, the people who were swept up and sent there and tortured and incarcerated without indictment for crimes, we found out eventually that 85% of those people had no connections with terrorist groups whatsoever. They were swept up by mercenaries, informants who just wanted money. They were swept up by soldiers who were operating with a confirmation bias. Anyway, at the end of the day, only 15% of the people who were sent there actually had any connections, even tenuous connections with terrorist groups. So since the very same means used to identify those people were also used in determining people to target using drone strikes, we have really we have grounds for believing that many of these people have been innocent as well, because it was the same kind of circumstantial evidence that was used. There was intel from from informants on the ground who were bribed, many of whom were destitute. There was SIGINT, which was SIM card data. So let's say your phone number is found in the phone of a suspected terrorist. Suddenly you become guilt by association. You also are a terrorist. When in fact you could have been a pizza delivery man. I mean, there are plenty of people in your phone who, they're there for the person who just called during our interview. I have no idea who this person was, but now that person's phone is in my phone. Right. So that was a source of information. Another source of so-called evidence was, of course, drone footage. So again, just like on August 29th, 2021, they followed the guy around with a drone, watched what he did. Ooh, it looked suspicious. And the same thing has happened over and over again throughout the war on terror. So if 85% of the men who were sent to Guantanamo Bay were innocent, we actually have grounds for believing that because the same forms of intel were used to draw up the hit list for the drone program, probably that many people were innocent as well. We'll never know. I mean, they were incinerated and, judge, jury, executioner. End of story, guilty until proven innocent, but never provided with the opportunity to demonstrate their innocence because they were never told that they were being targeted, and then they were killed. So it's really heinous. You can see I get very exercised about this. I mean, the drone program is, in a way, it's a proof of concept of everything I wrote in War and Delusion. It's like the worst distillation of the worst of everything that we've done in war under this completely delusive pretext of just war. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I mean, there's so many things. There was this story out of The Intercept about this young girl who was the only survivor of a drone strike in the Pesh Valley. And I can't remember exactly what year it was, but some of the details are just appalling. They would do several strikes on the truck. So it'd be one, and then they would do a sequence of spacing them out every couple of minutes. So the whole strike takes like 20 minutes. But it'd be in the theory behind that is that people come to assist, and then the last strike that comes has a bunch of shrapnel in it because it's an anti-personnel one. And
total war crime. When you target rescuers, you are committing a war crime. I mean, I don't care by anyone's reading of international law, that's a war crime. Yeah. And people have written about this and complained about it, but nothing has really been done about it. You know, it just keeps getting worse and worse, and now it's just become normalized where, you know, basically we don't really care what you think. We're going to do whatever we want to do, you know. So
yeah. Well, in other ones was, you know, the drones would fly by so frequently in the Pesh Valley that the workers in the fields, every time they heard or smelled one overhead, they would spread out. And it's not like they were thinking about it. It happened so often, it was automatic, like a smoke break or something.
Yeah, another discovery from people interviewing on the ground was that children became afraid to go out on sunny days because when there was cloud cover, the drones wouldn't come. But when the sun was out and the sky was blue, then drones would come and kill some of their neighbors, and they had no idea if they were going to be killed. I mean, they're constantly being terrorized. That's like the definition of terrorism. It's the threat of death or violence to innocent people. That's the definition of terrorism. Yeah. So this is a case where just, you know, waving the banner, we are good and they are evil, it just doesn't work anymore. If you look at the details on the ground of what is being done to these people, it's outrageous.
Now, I haven't had a chance to read your book, We Kill Because We Can, but in that, did you go through like the psychology of killing at all or get into that?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple chapters on drone operators. I think one of them is called From Conscience to Oblivion, so you should check out those chapters, and we can maybe talk about them sometime. You know, it's I had written an article at the very beginning of this century, which was called The Phenomenology of Paid Killing, where I compared soldiering to contract killing or hitmen. And I discovered, you know, I'm always just trying to I'm trying to solve these puzzles to myself. Like, how is it that people get talked into doing this? You know, if someone comes up to you on a street and says, "Hey, I'll give you a wad of cash if you go kill this person," you know, you're going to say no. So then how is it that soldiers get talked into doing this? You know, and they're similarly, or in fact better, remunerated for doing so. Of course, they get benefits. Maybe their college is paid for. They have a good salary, you know, so stable employment, and they get talked into doing it. So I wrote this essay where I compared, and it's actually been incorporated in War and Delusion in one of the chapters. So it's called Real Soldiers, and so I found that there's a schema. It's the commander, killer, victim, and the only difference, it's the same schema. Again, I look at the logical basics, you know, between what a hitman does and what a soldier does. It's the same exact schema. The only difference is the authority of the commander. So the question is, do you have more rational grounds for believing your authority because he's an elected politician than you would some, you know, random like mafia thug, you know, who approaches you on the street? Yeah. And, you know, of course I argue no.
It sounds like the Milgram experiment, you know?
Yeah, that's right. What can we get people to do? Yeah. So, and people have predictably had polarized reactions to what they've been asked to do. So some of the drone operators have dropped out of the program. They can't do it anymore because they woke up and they realized, like, what in the hell am I doing? And then others just become more entrenched and they become more and more adamant about doing it. So that's really interesting to look at.
Yeah. Have you seen the documentary film National Bird?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Hale was in that.
Yeah, Daniel Hale. That was before he was indicted and convicted, and now he's in prison. He's in federal prison for revealing to us that the U.S. government, and it stated that plainly in classified documents, considered every military-aged male killed by drone as an enemy killed in action. In other words, they considered them guilty until proven innocent rather than the reverse.
Yeah, it's just insane to think about. And I really think, and you'll probably agree that the military is probably moving towards remote killing as the norm, as we get more autonomous vehicles or some kind of. There's an episode in Stargate SG-1, which was on the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm a huge nerd. So it's about people who travel to a distant planet through like this ring they found in ancient Egypt. And so they get to this random planet and there's a war going on. And of course they get involved somehow with this war between, two different sides on a distant planet. And they say it's all for defensive purposes, and they're using the vehicles because they're using like aerial drones. And like the episode progresses and they find out that, well, the people operating the drones are operating drones, but the other side, they're real pilots. So and I think that's where things really are kind of moving. And I'm sure that there's some kind of intelligence community advisor that was working on the show at the time. Maybe that's conspiratorial of me, but
no, it's already happening. It's already happening. They want to, quote unquote, take the human being out of the loop. Why? Because human beings are subject to pangs of conscience, guilt, because they actually are troubled by this practice. And so they want to take the human operator out of the loop altogether so that it's all kind of on autopilot. I mean, the killing machine, in a sense, is on autopilot right now, but there still are live human beings serving as drone operators and sensor analysts, and in the whole colossus of the drone program. I mean, there are human beings all over the place. But what they find is that people do suffer regret. I mean, one of the most interesting discoveries from the apostate drone operators, to my mind, is that they suffered PTSD. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it used to be thought, it has to do with like you're traumatized by the fear of death, right? You were almost killed and you like barely survived. But what drone operator PTSD shows is that in fact, a lot of these people are afflicted by moral compunction for what they've done. There's no reason for them to fear death because their skin was never on the line. They were never in any danger of being killed, and yet they suffered from PTSD anyway. And so what the military leaders want to do is get rid of this factor. They consider it a form of weakness. In fact, it's a form of humanity. I mean, we should hesitate before killing someone. And this normalization of this practice of remote control killing of someone who is not threatening anyone with harm, someone who is not armed, someone who is located outside of a war zone in an area of an area of active hostility. We're just killing these people. This is equivalent to assassination. And it's actually, if you think about it in terms of the law, you know that a soldier on the ground is not permitted to execute an unarmed person. That's considered a war crime. So the puzzle, which I discuss in We Kill Because We Can, is how can it be legal for you to push a button in Nevada and kill someone in Pakistan when he's unarmed, he's not threatening you or anyone else with death, and if you were a soldier on the ground, it would be a war crime. So you have to reconcile these things, and people have just not discussed it enough because it's popular, this idea that you can spare soldiers' lives by using drones, but in fact, it's really morally atrocious what's going on. And I think that at some point we're going to have to come to terms with it when other countries start using them on our soil.
Yeah.
And that's when people are going to say, hey, wait a minute, my neighbor just disappeared. His house was there, and now there's a crater because a military drone came and took him out because some foreign military decided that he was a bad guy. I mean, it's that outrageous, and yet that's exactly what we're doing. We're killing people in their own civil societies. That's what we're doing. And I think in part, it's sad to say, but because Barack Obama was kind of given the benefit of the doubt for 8 years, it got normalized during that period. And then by the time Trump took over, it's just like what we do. That's just war. That's what we do now. So it's a tragedy. Most of the people Barack Obama killed, he was the first Black president, which is great. But most of the people that he killed were people of color, whom he stripped of their right to life and their right to defend themselves against the charge that they were guilty of future possible crimes. I mean, I think the most unbelievable part of all of the Obama story is that he actually is an attorney by profession,
right?
Like a constitutional lawyer, and that he did this to people, thousands of people.
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's absolutely incredible. I mean,
I also think that, like, if Trump had tried to, like, if there had been no Barack Obama, let's say we went from George W. Bush to Trump, if there had not been that 8-year period of normalization of assassination, I don't think Trump could have gotten away with it. Because so many people hated Trump, and so they would have called him out, but no one called out, hardly anyone called out Barack Obama. They were afraid of, I suppose, being labeled racist or whatever. For whatever reason, people did not call Barack Obama out, except for a few, heroes like Rand Paul, who did the filibuster against John Brennan's nomination to the CIA directorship because of the drone program. He asked really good questions. Rand Paul, if you watch that, I don't know if you had the chance to watch it, but it was like a 13-hour filibuster. He asked questions like, okay, so you killed Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen, U.S. citizen, didn't indict him for a crime, you just killed him. What if Anwar al-Awlaki had been down the street in my local Starbucks?
Right.
Would you have done the same thing here? So he asked really good questions, and we have to revisit those questions. And it has to become part of a more general dialogue instead of just nerds like you and me. Like, people have to start thinking about what we're doing. And that's why I hope that more people will address what happened on August 29th, 2021, and try to connect the dots and recognize that that was not exceptional. That was actually standard practice. That's like how they determine whom to kill. The guy's driving a white Toyota Corolla, for God's sake.
I mean, it's poetic injustice, if I can coin the phrase, because it just perfectly encapsulates, like, it was in a horrible, awful, grotesque way. It was the perfect bookend for the whole chapter in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's actually I think I have an essay at Libertarian Institute. I think I called it "A Fitting Flourish on a 20-Year Killing Spree."
Yeah.
This is like the perfect ending.
I think I saw that article, and that's the idea in my head. But we're running out of time here. There's so much more for us to talk about, and I hope that we can do it again soon. But what you said about the PTSD comment, this whole concept of moral injury, and what I've been trying to get at in my work is Dave Grossman, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, for the bastard that he is, touched on something really beautiful in his book On Killing. And I think there's so much more to explore there, just in terms of the evidence he provides for this innate resistance to taking human life.
Definitely. That was great that he did that. I agree. People don't. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. They found in these studies of World War I and World War II that often the people who are drafted to serve in these conflicts misaimed so that they wouldn't kill people. So they didn't want to kill people. And then after these conflicts, the military brass, they decided, we have to make people more lethal. So they put them through all these conditioning programs. And of course, in Vietnam, then they went kind of crazy. They killed everyone, in part because you couldn't distinguish combatants from non-combatants in that conflict. And so we know the casualties of the Vietnam War, not just the 58,000 dead men, but the hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of men who were really wrecked psychologically, like their lives were ruined as a result of that conflict. So it is true. Human beings, they don't naturally go commit murder. I mean, the reason why most people don't commit murder is not because murder is illegal. It's because they have no desire to go murder people.
Right.
I mean, that's why. The deterrence is a natural revulsion to killing our fellow human beings. And that has to be overcome. And it's being overcome in a variety of ways now in the 21st century. For example, providing soldiers, both active duty and veterans, with psychotropic drugs, which tamp their emotions and make them, it's all good, whatever, okay, so I was feeling bad. I thought maybe I shouldn't be killing these people, but whatever, so it's really frightening, because that's another way of eliminating the human factor by turning people into functional sociopaths.
Yeah. And I was wondering too, and if that so we talked about, remote killing and taking the human out of the equation, but
Mhm.
the alternative is like a chemical sterilization.
Mm.
And I'm not sure which one is more, more plausible in terms of, or
Mm.
what it's going to look like.
Yeah, well, they're both underway, so I guess we'll find out. Assuming we
Yeah,
don't have a nuclear holocaust as a result of the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
yeah, geez. Well, all right. Well, can you tell folks where to buy your books and to find your work?
Sure. We Kill Because We Can, From Soldiering to Assassination in the Drone Age is my searing critique of the whole practice of drone assassination and a killing of suspects by remote control. It's published by Zed Books in London, and Zed Books was recently acquired by Bloomsbury. So if you go to Bloomsbury, you can find my book there. But you can also just Google it; it'll come up. I also recorded it as an audiobook. Some people find it, too dense. You can listen to it, Then War and Delusion is published by Paul. It's called War and Delusion: A Critical Examination. It's published by Palgrave Macmillan, and it's also readily available if you Google it. I'm planning to record it as an audiobook, but I haven't done it quite yet. It's a little exhausting, actually, to record books, but I think it's a good thing to do because sometimes, you just can't process so much text. And so it actually is a good way to be able to absorb more books. For a lot of people, they can listen to audiobooks while they're driving or whatever. So, and I do have a blog. It's called thedroneage.wordpress.com, where I try to put all my articles about related to drone killing and war in general there, that I also have been publishing at Libertarian Institute. So you can pull up all my Libertarian Institute articles by just putting /L Calhoun, and they'll all come up. So
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining me, and we'll have to do it again because there's so much more at the tail end. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get a chance to finish the books, let me know. I'll be happy to discuss with you anytime.
Okay. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Take care. Okay.
You too.